going on, guys? Junior's Fishing Company with a dragonfly nymph today. I recently took the docks out at my cabin, and when we were pulling them out, I saw at least a dozen, probably 15 of these dragonfly nymphs that were just hanging out on all of the different rods and stuff that the dock was sitting on. And they were all really dark brown or really dark olive. If you held them up to the light, they were almost transparent, but they were really, really dark. And so I wanted to tie a pattern that looked exactly, or to match it as close to that color as I could. So what I ended up doing, I've got 101 Favorite Nymphs and Wet Flies by David Klossmeyer. Great book, and I've saved a bunch of these pages. And he has this hovering dragonfly. There's a couple great videos. One of them is by Charlie Craven. There's a few good dragonfly nymph videos out there. A lot of good pictures online. But I wanted to come up with something just a little bit different too. So this dragonfly nymph is on a 46-47 Daiichi, size 14. It's a longer shanked hook, but the gap is really thin because primarily I'm going to be catching a lot of bluegills with this, and those bluegills just have such small mouths where you can't really have a really wide gap. The tail of this bait is rabbit in dark olive. This is crosscut. If you're gonna order this, don't order crosscut, order the standard. The crosscut is just a little bit trickier. And then I ended up doing a small dubbing loop on here as well with the same rabbit. There's a ton of dubbing on here. What I ended up doing, I blended some squirrel hair in peacock with some Orvis spectrablend peacock. I just blended the two together, and I ended up using a ton of dubbing. You might not even be able to tell that there's a ton of dubbing on here, but I wanted a really fat bait because these dragonfly nymphs are really, really thick. The legs on here are Montana Fly Company Sexy Floss, barred Sexy Floss in olive small. If you look at a picture of a dragonfly nymph, or you just hold one in your hand, their legs are actually a little barred. And so I wanted to have something that was, as realistic as I could find. The little wing case on here is Swiss straw in dark brown. I don't know if they make olive or dark olive in Swiss straw, but this is the only color I had, and it was still nice and dark, so it still turned out pretty decent. And then the last thing, the weight of this, because again, I need to have this bait sink. I've got 3mm tungsten dumbbell eyes. These are a little bit heavier than, say, like a 3/16 inch tungsten bead. So there's going to be plenty of weight on this hook. And then to darken the dumbbell eyes, I just dabbed on a little bit of Solarez black. But enough talking. Let's tie it up. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my jig like this. I'm going to end up tying quite a bit of this jig, kind of inverted almost. I'm going to end up just flipping my hook in my vise as opposed to having to hold it upside down like this. I wanted my dumbbell eyes on the same side as my eye because when I put that Swiss straw in, it just lays better when you roll it over those dumbbell eyes as opposed to putting them on top. So I'm a little bit into the bend here. I'm going to take just a tiny little strip of this rabbit, and I'm going to tie it in just by, I'm going to cord my thread a little bit. I'm going to tie it just a little bit. This hide is really tough, and so you don't really need to wedge it in and get a bunch of that on your hook because it's going to end up staying there really, really well anyway. I'm just going to kind of catch the last little bit, and you can see the hide. And so what I'm going to do next is just a small dubbing loop to add a little bit more body, but really to cover up some of that hide too. And you can see how long even that little tiny strip of hair is. I want this jig to be for sure less than 1.5 inches, closer to 1 inch, as close to 1 inch as I can get it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to build up a little bit of a thread body. It's going to be a thick body anyway, and I want this thread to kind of bump up as close to that bump of rabbit as I can. You're not going to be able to tell much anyway. I'm just going to build it up a little bit there, and then I can kind of get ready for my dubbing loop. I really just pull out, I don't know, this is maybe, oh, I caught my thread. This is maybe 4 or 5 inches. It really doesn't matter. If you're making a 3-inch dubbing loop, a 2-inch dubbing loop, a 1-inch dubbing loop, I always just pull out pretty much the same amount of thread. So I've got my rabbit here. This is definitely going to be about as long as that initial one I put in, but I don't want it that long, so I'm going to end up trimming quite a bit of this off. So I'm going to pull it up quite a bit, almost 50-50, and you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see that thread, it's almost about 50-50. I'm going to cut a good bit of this off just because, again, I want it to be shorter, but really the main reason I don't want this to be too thick, and this rabbit is, the bottom of this rabbit has a lot of fluff in it. So I'm ready to spin this, and I put on more than I'm going to need. I would rather have just a little bit extra than not enough. And it can be, I haven't tied too many small dubbing loops like this. It can just be a little finicky getting it around. I'm used to tying on, you know, giant chatterbaits and stuff like that. Just working around the hook can just be a little bit tricky. But if you just take your time, fold everything back on every wrap, I'm going to go pretty far up. And then I'm going to end up wrapping back with my thread over some of this just to push it down. And then I'm going to get my Swiss straw laid down. And we're going to be putting plenty of dubbing down. So I'm just going to really come up to here. And that should be sufficient. So I'm just going to kind of work it through that mess. Maybe 3-4 turns. Try and wrap in the same spot. 4 turns. There's not a ton of pressure here. And then without cutting too much of that rabbit off, I'll get that out of the way. And then I'm going to push all of this back, and I'm going to wrap back on it just to give me some more room for my Swiss straw and my dubbing body, but it really won't affect the length of that dubbing loop too much. You can just pick out all the small stuff, and I can come up here, and there's a little bit of a thread bump here, but that's not going to matter at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up by my eyes, and I'm just going to half hitch just to kind of save my work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this hook, because I'm going to be working on the other half, or on the other side of this hook primarily. The rest of that bottom is just going to be dubbing. So I'm going to get this out of the way, and luckily rabbit, kind of like marabou, tends to follow directions decently well. As I wrap back up here, and I'll get my Swiss straw. So it can be a little bit tricky to get this Swiss straw laid on this dumbbell eye. And so when you cut it out of the package, there's a little curve, and I'm just going to lay that curve down, and I'm going to tie that in. Now I have that big bump right there, but that's alright. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get this kind of seated where I want it, make sure that it's nice and centered, and I'm going to get that pushed down. I can work my way back. This Swiss straw is really pliable, so you don't have to, you know, get your big denier out or anything like that. So I'm just going to trim this as much as I can, and then I'm going to come back here with my thread, and I'm just going to kind of try and get that down and it's just going to add some bulk to my body. And then I know it's down real well and it's going to be centered. So I've got my squirrel hair and my spectrablend blend ready to go. I'm just going to add this dubbing a little bit at a time because I'm going to put these legs down. So I'm going to get a decent length of dubbing down. I'm going to put it really tight because I don't want this dubbing on too loose. And I'm just going to kind of wrap up, and then I'm going to come back down here, and right where my Swiss straw starts, I'm going to put down my first set of legs. Now this Montana Fly Company Sexy Floss is pretty curved, and so you want to, when you lay this down, you want to decide if it's going to curve in, if those legs are going to curve out, or if they're going to curve in. I want these to curve in, so I'm going to kind of take it, and it really doesn't matter the length because you're going to end up trimming them off, and you're just going to do your best. I'm not going to say this is going to be perfect, but I kind of want them to be facing inward. For some reason I just don't want them flared super far out. I don't know why. It's kind of just the decision I've made. If they end up getting flared out a little bit, that's fine. And that's really just for these back legs. So I'm going to put it on one side, and then I'm going to fold it over to the other side. And then I can kind of just work that. You just want them to be, it's kind of nice to, these dumbbell eyes are really big, so it's a little bit easier to line them up just with kind of the center of the dumbbell eyes, really all you have to do. And just get it nice and tight down there. That silicone sits really nice. And I'm going to cover up my thread wraps with more of this dubbing. And you can overdo it, but really those dragonfly nymphs are so fat anyway, where it's going to be a little bit hard to overdo it. And I'm just going to come up, I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to get my other legs ready. So with these legs, I'm just going to kind of pinch them like this, make a little circle, and I'm going to put them down because I want 6 legs on here. So I'm going to put these down with the little circle. I mean, this is a pretty common way to put legs down. So I'm going to put these down right just a little bit behind my dumbbell eyes. Couple loose wraps, and then I'm going to pull these legs right in line with the other ones I put down. So I'll do the other side. If your first legs are off, just line these up with those and they'll all be off. Now I'll just make sure that those are wrapped nice and tight on there. And then I can split these legs just really wherever. I'm going to trim them anyway. And then I'm going to put some dubbing down to help separate. You can see these ones are splayed nicely, but I'm going to put some dubbing down to help push these all around. So I'm just going to get more of this spectrablend and squirrel hair, and I'll put it on there. So I'll get that ready, and then I'm just going to kind of work it. I got to split these legs. Just go right in between them, and that will cause them to really separate how you want. And I don't want it to be uneven. I can see it's getting a little uneven, so I'm going to do a wrap back here just to make sure that that stays nice and fat. And I can come just right up here, and then I'll come right behind my dumbbell eyes, and I can just make sure that these legs are going to be how I want them, which they don't have to be perfect. I'm going to put a little more dubbing down. I'm going to put another long one down because I'm going to end up X-wrapping over this dumbbell eye, because under here I have just pretty much bare thread, and I don't want just bare thread right there. This brown, olive brown thread blends in really nice, but I just want the whole jig to have this coloring just for consistency, really. So I'll get that pushed up, I'll do a couple, fold these legs back. I have dubbing everywhere. And then I'll come right there. I'll end up right behind it. And what you can kind of just decide is, I've gone back and forth. I don't have much dubbing at all right by the eye of my hook, and you could leave it just like this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little more dubbing down, not a ton. I'm going to get a little bit off. I'm going to put a little bit more down, and I'm going to dub up there. And what I'm going to do is, I've got my dubbing ready, but I've got a little bit of thread. I'm going to pull down my Swiss straw, and I'm going to get that tied down, get that pushed right nice and tight right by my eye, and I can do a couple really tight wraps just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Again, this stuff holds pretty good. I'm going to trim it as best as I can with that eye being right there, but again, I can just do some wraps right over that, and it's going to get pushed out of the way. And I'll take my dubbing, and I'm just going to wrap just to cover all that up, add a little bit of bulk to that nose. So I'll get my whip finish, and I'm just going to, it can be a little bit tricky getting that in there, but I'm going to just pull it nice and carefully, tighten that up, get that trimmed off. Now, when I'm going to trim these legs, so I flip this hook back, so these are barred legs, and so what I'm really just going to do is, I mean, you can pull them back and you can measure them that way, but I really am just going to count the bars. So like these front legs, I might want to be the shortest, or you can do the longest, or you can do them all the same length. It's totally up to you. I'm really just probably going to do 3 full bars on this front, and I'll just trim them that way. 1, 2, 3. I'll just trim it right there. And then these back 2, I'll probably just do 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Just a little bit longer than my front ones. And then these back ones, I mean, I might just do the same. See how they're just a little bit shorter? I really don't care much about how long these are going to be. So I'll just do the same on the back, which will be 4 bars, and those will be my longest ones. Now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my eyes and I'm going to darken them up. So I've got this black Solarez, and I'm just going to lightly dab these eyes. I don't want to cover it too thick because I don't want them to be a big bump. I just want to cover up that eye, the dumbbell part of the eye, and then I can just zap it. So I'll just hold that there for a couple seconds. And this, I found that this black takes a little bit longer to cure. I'm not going to sit here for too long. I'm just going to get it cured enough, and then we'll do the other one. So I'll come to the other side, and you have to be a little bit careful of your dubbing. This stuff will just stick to that dubbing, and it's almost like ink. It just gets everywhere. Gets all over your hands. You might get a little bit on your dubbing. That's not the end of the world, but that dubbing just gets in the way. And there you have it. About a 1.25 inch little dragonfly nymph, dark olive, peacock dubbing, heavy tungsten dumbbell eyes. So I'm going to fish this. It's going to sink plenty fast. It's going to do exactly what I need it to do. That was the trickiest part, was finding a way to make this heavier, or heavy enough to fish. I really like how this Swiss straw looks. I think it's going to reflect just a little bit of light, which is going to be nice just to attract a little bit. That dubbing loop makes the abdomen, or whatever part of the bug that is, nymph, whatever part of the nymph that is, but it makes it really nice and bulky, because in those pictures and, you know, in real life, they just have a really wide abdomen. So I'm hoping that that stays, keeps its thick shape. Like and subscribe. Junior's Fishing Company. See you in the next one.